The Chicago autumn wind rattled the windows of Roosevelt High School, where Margaret Delaney had taught for 32 years. Her coffee mug, a ceramic piece painted with wildflowers that her late husband Robert had given her, sat half empty beside a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. The classroom walls displayed decades of student artwork, handwritten thank you notes and faded photographs from countless graduation ceremonies. Margaret's fingers traced the edge of a particularly thoughtful essay about justice and moral courage. At 63, she still felt the same spark she'd experienced as a young teacher, that profound satisfaction of watching minds bloom and hearts open to literature's transformative power. The disinfectant smell from Monday's deep cleaning lingered in the hallway, mixing with the familiar scent of chalk dust and adolescent energy that had become her second home. She had stayed late again, as she often did, to lead the free literature discussion group she'd started 5 years ago for students who couldn't afford tutoring. The after-school program had grown from 3 students to 15, meeting in her classroom every Tuesday and Thursday. These weren't just academic sessions, they were lifelines for kids who needed someone to believe in their potential when the world had forgotten they existed. The sudden knock on her door shattered the peaceful evening atmosphere. Principal Henderson stood in the doorway, her usually warm expression replaced by something cold and official. Beside her stood Mrs. Watson, the school secretary, clutching a clipboard like armor, and Officer Martinez from school security, his presence filling the doorframe with an ominous weight. "Mrs. Delaney, can you come with us?" The principal's voice lacked its usual warmth, the same voice that had shed tears over her divorce proceedings just last year, seeking Margaret's counsel during their many coffee conversations. Margaret's heart began pounding against her ribcage, but she maintained her composure, straightening her shoulders as she had taught herself to do through 32 years of classroom challenges. The walk down the familiar hallway felt different, now as if she was seeing it through a stranger's eyes. Students' lockers lined the walls like silent witnesses, and the trophy cases seemed to glare with reflected fluorescent light. In the principal's office, Margaret's Educator of the Year plaque still hung on the wall, but her personnel file lay open on the conference table like an autopsy report. A single sheet of paper sat atop the documents typed in cold official font. Her eyes scanned the contents with growing disbelief, missing technology equipment tablets, a printer, a projector. Her name circled in aggressive red ink at the bottom. The accusations felt like physical blows. Margaret had dedicated her life to this institution, had given everything she had to nurture young minds and build character. She had used her own money countless times to buy supplies, had opened her home for tutoring sessions, had attended every graduation and school event for 3 decades. Now she sat accused of theft, her integrity questioned by the very people who had celebrated her dedication. "We received an anonymous tip," Principal Henderson explained, her eyes avoiding Margaret's gaze. "The school board is moving forward with a formal investigation. I'm sorry, but we need you to take temporary leave while this is resolved." Margaret nodded once the gesture carrying 32 years of professional dignity. She gathered her purse and coat, feeling every pair of eyes in the hallway follow her departure. The whispers started before she reached the parking lot, the hushed conversations that would spread through the school like wildfire, carrying her name alongside words like theft and investigation. Her small apartment in Lincoln Park felt impossibly quiet that evening. The same living room where she had tutored struggling students for free now seemed to echo with accusations. She sat on the couch where she had held Robert's hand during his cancer diagnosis 7 years ago, where she had grieved alone after his passing, and where she now faced the potential destruction of everything she had built. The next few days passed in a blur of silence. Her phone remained stubbornly quiet. No calls from colleagues, no messages of support. The absence of communication spoke louder than any accusation. Margaret found herself questioning relationships she had thought were solid, wondering if 32 years of service could be erased by a single anonymous tip. The official letter arrived on Thursday, delivered with ceremonial cruelty by certified mail. Someone had filed a formal complaint, and a hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Margaret barely slept that weekend, her mind racing through every interaction, every decision, every moment that might have led to this nightmare. On Saturday, She returned to Roosevelt High to collect her personal belongings. The security guard made her sign papers and searched her bag like she was a common criminal. She packed her books, her photographs, and the crocheted pillow from the reading corner, a gift from a former student who had struggled with literacy until Margaret stayed, late every day for months to help her catch up. She wondered where that student was now, whether she remembered the teacher who had believed in her when no one else would. The weekend stretched endlessly before her. Margaret organized her defense materials with the same meticulous care she had always brought to lesson planning. Every receipt, every email, every documentation of her interactions with students and equipment. She had nothing to hide and everything to lose. The hearing was held in the district office downtown, a sterile building with white walls and cold tile floors that seemed designed to intimidate rather than inspire. Margaret wore her navy suit, the one with silk lining and pearl buttons that she reserved for graduations and special occasions. She pinned her graying hair back with the silver beret Robert had given her on their 20th anniversary, and wore her wedding ring like a talisman against the accusations threatening to destroy her reputation. The school board consisted of 5 members seated behind the imposing oak table. Only 2 looked her in the eyes when she entered the room. The others studied their papers or stared at points beyond her shoulder as if direct eye contact might contaminate them with her alleged criminality. The formal proceedings began with cold efficiency, each question delivered like a surgical strike against her character. They asked about the missing equipment. Margaret explained calmly how she had signed out the items to support a student in crisis, a young woman whose mother was battling terminal cancer, who was serving as the family's primary caregiver while trying to maintain her education. She had received permission from the previous technology department head, who had since retired. Every step had been documented, every decision made with the students' welfare as the primary concern. But when they asked for proof, when they demanded evidence beyond her word and her documented sign-out sheets, Margaret felt the weight of bureaucracy crushing her good intentions. The board members' faces remained skeptical, their questions growing sharper, their tone more accusatory. She could see the decision forming in their eyes, the comfortable choice to sacrifice one teacher rather than admit the system's failures. Then the door opened unexpectedly and everything changed. The young woman who entered carried herself with a confidence that seemed to fill the sterile room with warmth. She was tall now, probably 21 or 22, with dark hair neatly tied, back and eyes that held a resolve Margaret recognized but had never seen so fully developed. It was Celeste Rodriguez, the struggling student who had nearly dropped out 3 years ago. "I apologize for being late," Celeste said, her voice clear and strong, "but I need to speak to this board about Mrs. Delaney." The board members looked confused, shuffling papers and exchanging glances. Margaret felt her heart skip with recognition and hope. Celeste looked directly at each board member, her posture straight and her voice unwavering as she continued. "I'm the student she helped. Mrs. Delaney didn't steal anything. She saved my life and I can prove it." The transformation in the room was immediate and electric. Celeste's words cut through the formal proceedings like truth through deception. She spoke of her mother's stage 4 cancer diagnosis, of becoming the family's primary caregiver at 17, of working part-time while trying to maintain her grades. She described the moment she had told Mrs. Delaney she was dropping out, feeling defeated by circumstances beyond her control. "Mrs. Delaney didn't offer me pity," Celeste continued, her eyes meeting Margaret's across the room. "She offered me action. She found a way for me to keep the school equipment I needed to complete my assignments from home. She tutored me online after her regular teaching hours. She bought my textbooks with her own money when I couldn't afford them. She checked on my family weekly, brought groceries when my mother was too sick to shop, and never once made me feel like a charity case." The silence in the room was profound. Margaret felt tears threatening but maintained her composure, watching this remarkable young woman, her former student, defend her with an eloquence that would have made any English teacher proud. Celeste turned to face the board directly. "If you punish Mrs. Delaney for helping me succeed, then you're punishing every student she's ever lifted up, and there are dozens of us. I'm just the one who made it here in time to tell you the truth." The hearing concluded shortly after Celeste's testimony. The board members huddled in whispered conference while Margaret and Celeste waited in the hallway. 2 days later, the official letter arrived, all accusations dropped, file cleared, formal apologies issued. But the damage had already taken root in the school's culture and Margaret's reputation. Returning to Roosevelt High felt like entering a changed world. Colleagues who had once shared lunch and laughter now offered polite nods and quickly averted gazes. The whispers hadn't stopped. They had simply become more discreet. Margaret's smile felt forced. Her shoulders carried new tension, and every interaction seemed filtered through the residue of suspicion that lingered, despite her official exoneration. But she continued teaching with the same passion that had sustained her for 3 decades. If anything, the experience had deepened her understanding of how quickly circumstances could change how fragile reputation could be, and how precious authentic human connections truly were. She poured herself into her students with renewed intensity, knowing that each day in the classroom was both a privilege and an opportunity to make a difference. Celeste became a regular visitor, bringing coffee during Margaret's planning periods, helping grade papers and staying after school to assist other struggling students. She would tell them, "Mrs. Delaney helped me when I needed it most. Now I want to do the same for others." Her presence in the classroom brought Margaret immense joy, a living testament to the power of education and compassion working together. Have you ever experienced or known someone who has experienced being falsely accused of something they didn't do? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. One particularly grey afternoon in late spring, Celeste handed Margaret an envelope, with hands that trembled slightly with excitement. Inside was an acceptance letter to Northwestern University's teacher preparation program, along with a full scholarship offer. But it was the handwritten note tucked behind the official documents that brought tears to Margaret's eyes. "You gave me a future when I thought I had none. This is me giving back to other students who need what you gave me." The final chapter of Margaret's teaching career began with a recognition she hadn't expected. The Chicago Board of Education, having learned of the false accusations and their resolution, invited her to speak at their annual conference about supporting students in crisis. Standing before hundreds of educators, Margaret felt the weight of her experience transform into wisdom she could share. As she prepared for retirement at the end of that school year, Margaret reflected on the journey that had tested her faith in the educational system, but ultimately strengthened her belief in individual connection and compassion. The false accusations had been painful, but they had also revealed the depth of impact one teacher could have on a student's life. On her final day at Roosevelt High, Margaret's classroom filled with former students' colleagues who had rediscovered their respect for her and parents whose children she had taught and nurtured. Celeste, now beginning her student teaching semester, stood at the front of the room with a framed photograph of Margaret's literature discussion group, the same group that had met after hours for free, the same commitment to student success that had led to the accusations and ultimately to her vindication. In that moment, surrounded by the evidence of 3 decades of dedicated service, Margaret understood that her legacy wouldn't be defined by the false accusations she had endured, but by the lives she had touched, and the truth that had ultimately prevailed. The whispers and suspicions had faded, replaced by genuine appreciation for a teacher who had never stopped believing in her students, even when the system had stopped believing in her. The truth had prevailed, carried by the voice of one student, whose life had been transformed by compassion and dedication. In a world that too often forgets the power of individual kindness, Margaret Delaney's story reminded everyone present that sometimes one voice speaking truth with courage is enough to change everything. Congratulations, type 9 in the comments, so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.